Hi, thank you so much for joining today. We have Rupert Hackett, the co-founder of crypto exchange bitcoin.com.au. Rupert, thank you so much for joining today and for your time to answer some of the questions and provide insights. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm?
Thanks, Breana. Thanks for having me on. So what we've really done is tried to pioneer the retail purchasing experience for digital currency. So this kind of story goes back 4 years ago, I guess, and the concept really is that digital currency really needs a low barrier to entry and a very trustful experience to purchase. And that's really what we've spent this whole time doing is in effect building a brand identity and a very easy system to purchase digital currency. So we've done that in Australia, and now we're launching into the UK as bitcoin.co.uk, into Canada as bitcoin.ca, and Europe as bitcoin.eu. And the idea is we're trying to build digital currency to mass market.
So how do you differentiate yourself from the other crypto exchanges?
Yeah, so the biggest difference I think is with other crypto exchanges is what they're really doing is the value proposition is put towards a speculative investor. So when we look at the market in Australia, it's only 1.3% of Australians have digital currency accounts. So although there's been this massive boom in the ecosystem, there's still not a lot of penetration into the mass market. And the difference is what we're trying to do is build it so that it's easy to understand for the everyday person. And how we've done that is around the retail model. So what defines us compared to our competitors is when you walk down the street, you see a poster and it says, buy Bitcoin in store in 60 seconds. And you can walk into there and speak with someone. We've got, in Australia, we've got 1,200 flagship stores that service this model. And the concept is you can walk in and say, hey, I want some Bitcoin. And then you can see Bitcoin on the register, hand over some money and get that instantly delivered to any third-party wallet within 10 minutes. So it's a really different model because what we're trying to do is build it out to the everyday person walking down the street as opposed to the crypto-savvy speculative trader that wants to diversify their portfolio. We're really trying to push this to the greater population.
That's fantastic. It's a really unique model. I'm very interested to learn about it. So how do you, since building this firm, what is one of the most interesting stories that has happened at your firm, or if you could share something that has really been interesting to know about?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work with an organisation called the Australian Digital Commerce Association. So we founded in 2014, I think it was, to try to unify the industry and have a common voice towards regulators. That's been very successful. We spent about 2 years working with the Australian Transaction Reporting Commission and getting regulation into Australia, which passed in April, which was a great thing for the industry. But really the groundwork that had to be done there was a lot of working with regulators and officials and government entities and really trying to push the positive narrative of cryptocurrency or the understanding through those old school traditional entities. So a lot of the work I was doing was actually in trying to speak with law enforcement and get them to not see cryptocurrency as a hostile technology. And there was a lot of pushback from law enforcement. I remember I used to get calls and people would say, oh, what is this Bitcoin thing? You got to stop Bitcoin. You got to put an end to this. Like this, like I have the ability to stop a decentralized technology. And I remember one day I was invited to the Victorian cybercrimes division. I went up to the 14th floor of the biggest police building in Victoria. And I was having, sparkling water with 7 constables, and they were actually very positive towards the technology, and that they understood how it worked and its implications, and wanted to try to basically see how we can use this for a better Australia, so to speak. And then I remember leaving that meeting and having, quite an enthusiasm for where the dialogue was going. And then I got a call, and there was someone from the holding bay below had found my name, and it was associated with digital currency and people buying and selling Bitcoin. And he called me up and said, I'm sorry, but it looks like I have to arrest you. And he said, so come into the holding bay tonight. And for 5 hours, I very, very stressful situation. I spoke to my lawyers, all this, and their advice is, well, if they want you to come into the holding bed, then they're going to arrest you. And so I went in, and then I understood quite quickly that it wasn't actually that they were going to arrest me. It was simply a lack of understanding about the tech. And so after, a 20-minute conversation, it became quite clear that we're on the same side and we can collaborate on things. But yeah, I think to this day, that's probably the strangest situation I've been in for running a Bitcoin business.
That's really, yeah, it's also a challenge, right? Because you have to constantly fight with the regulators and try and make ways for cryptocurrency to maybe go mainstream one day.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's quite a challenge to basically have that pushing forward with the dialogue when there's a lot of naysayers and a lot of people which don't principally see it. I remember I've worked in this space for 14 months when the price of Bitcoin went from 1,200 US to 200 US, and trying to have conviction and determination through the negative news is something which a lot of people don't see in these videos and these types of things.
Yeah, that's true. So so switching the gears a little bit on leading teams, since founding this company, what are some of the major challenges that you've faced in leading large teams or teams that are geographically in diverse locations? What are the top challenges, and what steps have you taken to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I think, one of the biggest challenges is particularly in the scaling of a company from, say, 5 to 25 people. Through that, what I found is that you had to principally rethink all your styles of management. What I found was when you have a small team, it's quite easy to have a very collective approach where when you say something, it just naturally precipitates to all members of the team. And as a result, by just having presence, there's a sense of unity between everyone. The challenge is that when you scale up from that, the diffusion of information just doesn't reach, and you'll find that if you use the same principles of management, then ultimately you'll find that people had no idea what you said when you came from an assumption that the information was equally shared and distributed through the group. And that's a major challenge, and it requires you to principally rethink the structure of organization and your management style. From that is really what you're trying to do and what you're trying to build within the team. So once you kind of solve the communication, it's really about how do you communicate when you can't communicate, or how do you have a passive communication, you could say, within an organization. And for me personally, I found that a lot of that was around building empathy into the process and balancing that with objective. So when you have an organization that's large, people want to have a sense that what you're building is something real and significant, but also that they're an individual still within the ecosystem. They have a voice. And the challenge is building that into the process and the ethos in the business.
Mm-hmm. So many times people, when they quit their jobs, they're actually quitting their managers. And so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I understand that there's, when people quit their jobs, they're quitting their managers. And I think that really relates to the type of culture and ethos that you're building within an organization. From my perspective, is that the company isn't just the manager, but it's the principles and the culture that the manager creates. From that is that if you apply a collective approach, everyone is a part of that and should feel equally as important. From my mind, the principle of being a manager is not a position that one should idolize as much as it is a position where you problem solve. And if you can do that in the right capacity, then you're validated to have that position. But it's of equal importance to every other position in the organization. As a result, when you're trying to create the culture and ethos, as long as everyone feels very valued within that organization, and ultimately, I believe that the quitting the manager should not be really of the greatest concern, because the company goes on. It's the principles of the company that need to remain in equally distributed throughout all people, so to speak.
Yep. So if you were to give top 5 tips on how to successfully manage teams and be a real leader, what would those be?
Yeah. So when thinking about my top 5 tips, I guess for me personally, the things which I've found to be the most impactful in the success and the biggest importance of the challenges that I found. Number one is to break and build yourself. And so what I mean by that is what you'll find is that you need to constantly relearn everything. And if you're not willing to kind of break yourself down to that fundamental level, then you'll probably be using the same tools to try to solve the problems, and it won't work. It's one of the hardest things I've found, because it means you have to take a very humbled approach to what you're doing. But ultimately, I think that's probably one of that's my number one thing in how to be a successful manager. My second number thing is that you should not view the position as a position of status. Really, when it comes to being a manager, it requires you to first and foremost put other people first. That's very important to understand, is that even though there's a certain level of esteem towards managers, the truth is there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of constant care and continual problem solving that you have to apply at a very high level, which ultimately puts you not really as a position of status, but also as the hardest working person in the organization. My third tip is to always value hearts and minds. A lot of people, when they're looking for a job, what they want is a sense of belonging and respect. What I've found is that, again, if you're hiring people, do you have my heart and mind? Do I have your heart and mind? And that is by far one of the biggest validators I've seen for successful performance on a job. The other thing which I think is really important that managers understand is that you have to live and die on your decisions. A lot of people, I think that there's bad news and there's good news, and a lot of people will shy away from delivering the bad news, and it can be very tough. When you have to fire someone, or the company's in duress, and you have to make a judgment call on what part gets
right.
But that's the challenge. If you shy away from that, then you're never going to really get over that internal conflict. And really, it's very important to move through that, because it will always be there. And my final tip is understand the value of problem solving. And what I mean by this is, a lot of successful people that I've seen, they immediately move from a place of a poor decision or a conflict or an internal challenge that needs to be solved. And there's not much rumination. There's not much emotional time where they sit there and consider, how did this happen to them, or who's to blame. They move directly into a place of problem solving. And I think people really underestimate the power of this, because ultimately, if you're using 100% of your brain power to problem solve, then in effect you're working 24/7 with 100% efficiency. And I think it's very important that people need to master their mind to become successful problem solvers, which makes them great at running businesses.
So if we were to talk about blockchain or Bitcoin, and if you were to describe it to a child in the simplest way, how would you describe it to a child, that what is blockchain or what is Bitcoin?
Yeah, so blockchain and Bitcoin is a very confusing subject. And the reason why is because it's a fundamental technology that can be looked at in so many lenses. And really what you find is you can say the big idea, but it leads into a lot of why questions or how questions. And then you end up in the minutiae, which requires a lot of background reading. So if I was explaining that in a very simplistic term, it is the world's first technology that removes the need for a centralized adjudicator. And that's it, right? So it's like if a kid has a whole bunch of lollies and they give it to their parents, basically, as opposed to giving it to your parents, you don't have to trust anyone. There's now a robot you can give it to that will be completely fair in all decisions and always trustworthy. And that's the principal big idea of the tech. And it's the world's first time we've ever been able to do that, which is why it's such an exciting invention.
That's fantastic. I would have never thought to, rephrase it in that way for a child. Thank you so much for your time, Rupert, today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for your insights.
No worries. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.
You too.